Do you want the Labour Party to represent the working class or not? We are hamstrung by the fact that people, regularly during the general election say, oh, your leader doesn't know what a woman is, and I have to say, well, I do.
Do you think he will survive, or are your colleagues sufficiently febrile and upset about all this that it could cost him his job either now or after the by-election or after the May elections?
I genuinely don't know. My constituents generally don't vote for the Greens. They're never going to vote for the Greens. They think they're mad. So do I.
And if Keir Starmer phoned you on the 8th of May and said, Jonathan, things are sticky. I know they're bad. Some people want me out. I'd like you to support me. What's the one thing I need to do to turn this around? What would you tell him? Hello and welcome to Coffee House. I'm Tim Shipman, political editor of The Spectator, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Jonathan Hinder, one of the rising stars of the Labour backbenches and a man who is prepared to speak his mind on a range of subjects. So welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you for having me.
Look, we can't start what I hope is an interesting and wide-ranging conversation without just talking about the state of play today. What did you make of what the Prime Minister had to say at PMQs yesterday about the Mandelson affair, and where do you think we are today? What are your colleagues saying? How secure is the PM?
Well, obviously the Prime Minister's spoken at this Pride in Place speech about this, and he's right that he tackled it head on. I think he struck the right tone. But I've said that what I want to see now is an acknowledgement that it was a serious political error that was made in ever appointing Mandelson. I think it's fair to say that if he did not have the connections, if he was not so popular in the media and all of that stuff, this guy's record would say this person should be nowhere near any sort of position in the Labour Party, never mind the most senior diplomatic position. So a little bit of humility, I think, would be welcome from the leadership, and hopefully us MPs will get that at the Parliamentary Labour Party next week.
And do you think it would have been a mistake, even with what was known at the time, which is that he was friendly with Epstein, but clearly we didn't know about money being taken? The Prime Minister's position is that he didn't know about that. He didn't know about Mandelson leaking kind of cabinet information or gossip about the Prime Minister of the day to this guy. Your view is that that was a mistake even with what he knew at the time? Even
with the information that was available. I mean, this is a man who was sacked for impropriety twice as a government minister. And it's just remarkable that he's been continually rehabilitated, including by large sections of the media, because he's a good gossip, he's charming, he's got wealthy connections. And actually, you think, what kind of standard is that? I go to my constituents in Pendle and Clitheroe. How can I knock on their door and say that he's the right kind of person who's representing Labour interests? It's madness.
A lot of your colleagues are saying, well, the bloke who pushed him was Morgan McSweeney, the guy who pushed him forward. McSweeney, the Chief of Staff in Number 10, a bit of a mentee to Mandelson, and clearly was influential in encouraging the Prime Minister to appoint him. A lot of your colleagues saying, at least off the record, that McSweeney should go or that he should be fired. Is that something you agree with? Or?
I always focus on the politicians rather than the advisors, and it's up to the politicians to decide who they have advising them, but it's also up to them to decide which of their advice they want to take. So I think it's a bit of a sideshow, to be honest. It's up to Keir Starmer to decide who he wants to advise him, and he has to take responsibility for the decisions he's made. So I wouldn't focus on the advisors.
And based on what you know at the moment, do you think the Prime Minister should fight the next election for the Labour Party?
Well, that's obviously a long way away. But what I would say is that we need to be focused on what the problems are the Labour Party has got, and I think we're going to talk about some of those, which are very long-standing, which have led us to this point, rather than the personalities, who might replace him if there were to be a leadership challenge. So I'm not calling for that at this point. I think it's time for us to have another reset and actually set out the good things that we're trying to do and what more we're going to do in the next few years.
Well, as well as being a sort of dynamic, good constituency MP and spokesman for all your beliefs, you are also an occasional writer for The Spectator. So I'll ask you to put your media hat on. Having said you're not going to be drawn on whether you think he should be, do you think he will survive, or are your colleagues sufficiently febrile and upset about all this that it could cost him his job either now or after the by-election or after the May elections?
I genuinely don't know. That's the honest answer. What I would say is there is a huge diversity of opinion in the Labour Party as to what the problems are. So I've got a particular diagnosis of where I think the Labour Party is going wrong, but there would be plenty of my colleagues who would vehemently disagree with that diagnosis. So I think when you have such a disagreement, there is more likelihood that actually there is not a shift in a particular direction, because actually if you have that fight, then it could get quite messy with people kind of trying to pull the party in a particular direction. So I think that probably makes the Prime Minister a bit safer for now. But clearly there are serious issues, and the man at the moment is not popular in the country.
Well, let's go on to those issues. Put the leadership aside. Whoever is leading the Labour Party, say at conference this year, what should they be telling the country? What is your diagnosis of what's wrong, and what should the Labour Party do about it?
Yeah, so I think the Labour Party has been doing some excellent things since we're in government, but in terms of the reorientation we need, it is back towards the people we were formed to represent. So I'm sure you saw the polling recently which suggested now, today, the most likely education background to vote Labour would be privately educated people. Not even grammar schools, not people who've gone to state school, but privately educated people. Now, that is a sign that we have gone completely amiss in terms of representing the people we were formed to represent. I'm nothing against people who went to private schools, but we need to be serious about why is it that our safest constituencies in the country are generally in the cities which are doing quite well, which have got lots of graduates. They are not places in the north of England, in the Midlands, in South Wales, parts of Scotland, where people have not necessarily been to university, they work, but they don't feel like the Labour Party represents them anymore. And that is the tradition that I want to go back to, which is the Labour Party, of course, accepting lots of support from all over the country, all different types of people, but at the kind of foundation, acknowledging we are there to represent working class people, the Labour interest. The clue should be in the name. And I think too many people in my constituency, being totally honest, they think the Labour Party is all about minorities. It's more concerned with people who are on benefits than people who are in work. And it's more concerned sometimes with people who've just arrived here than those people who've been here their whole lives. Now, I don't necessarily think that's what my colleagues think, but that brand is a very, very toxic one when it comes to actually winning support. So we need a serious, serious course correction. It's not the fault of any one leader. This has been happening for decades. So an acknowledgement of that and a course correction is what we need.
I mean, nearly every Labour leader we've had has been a lawyer from somewhere, and now we have a North London lawyer whose best pal is a North London lawyer who's now the Attorney General. So there is that sort of look. It's possibly quite difficult for Starmer to move away from that, but there are people in and around him who would agree with you. I think McSweeney's probably one of them. A lot of people around the Prime Minister, perhaps his new Director of Communications, perhaps Tom Baldwin, his biographer, would be telling him all the votes that are going begging are on the other side, on the left. We should be cozying up to people who are drifting off to the Greens or thinking about voting Lib Dem, the white working class voters, those people who voted perhaps for Brexit while still supporting the Labour Party, or maybe tried Boris Johnson and that didn't work and they've gone back to Labour now. A lot of those votes have already gone to Reform. You're not going to get them back. So what do you say to those people who say we've got a huge tranche of votes on the left and we should be emphasising net zero, tacking to the left on economics and all that sort of stuff?
I'd ask them a simple question, which is, do you want the Labour Party to represent the working class or not? And I think it's quite revealing when you ask that actually they don't really have an answer, you know. And to the point about the Greens, my constituents generally don't vote for the Greens. They're never going to vote for the Greens. They think they're mad. So do I. You know, we're talking about a moment of geopolitical instability. They're talking about doing deals with people in the global south and putting down weapons, getting Putin to talk. You know, this is insane. So to me, there's a kind of a lack of nuance in people's understanding. Actually, the reason why the two main parties are doing so badly is there's a real consensus in the country that we need a shake-up. And quite a lot of that can be captured with a bold left-wing economic agenda, because people understand that private corporations have got too much control over our lives. The government doesn't really run the economy, the ownership, not just of the public services, but also of the private industries is often abroad. So there's a real way through here for Labour, which is a bolder economic programme, but also rediscovering those working class values, and less of the woke stuff. I mean, it just goes down so badly. I'm absolutely someone who would say that I'm absolutely comfortable with modern Britain. But at the same time, you can still say we want low controlled immigration. And, we haven't got these crazy views on social issues, which just repel people. Then it's not that people think that that's their priority, the party's positions on those, but it's a sniff test.
Yeah.
And they think, well, you're not really speaking to my real concerns, which is, have I got meaningful work, which pays okay? Can I afford a house, spend time with family,
Let's drill into both those issues in a moment, but let's just come back more broadly, because you're talking about a more bold economic offering. How do you have a bold economic offering that is not just spending more, taxing more, and frankly upsetting the markets?
Yeah.
We saw what happened when Andy Burnham said, I don't really think we should be listening to these markets. The markets got very jittery about that. We saw what they did to Liz Truss. It's possible, if you have a much more robust Labour offering in this kind of climate, that the markets will cause any government making that offer rather difficult. Rachel Reeves has survived so far, despite not having a great time of it, because she is the guardian of those fiscal rules and the markets have bought shares in those. How do you, either with this Prime Minister or with another one, be more bold, more Labour, if you like, without kind of getting caught out by the bond markets?
So again, we've got to kind of understand the nuance here. When I say a bold economic agenda, I don't just mean a bigger state, more spending. The crucial thing at the moment is our state has grown quite a bit in recent years, but it's not a stronger state. It's not actually intervening to shape the economy in the way that I would like. So it's not necessarily about spending more money, but it's actually having an industrial strategy that says this country needs to be self-sufficient in as many basic needs as it possibly can. And actually, we saw it with Scunthorpe. That was one of the best things the government has done. It said, we cannot have this free market force, meaning that we don't make steel in this country anymore. And this has happened over many, many decades. And now we're incredibly exposed, not just militarily, but economically. The two are very much linked. So actually, you can say, well, what incentives are we going to put in place for people to invest in more disadvantaged areas, like the areas that I represent? We actually had rules, for instance, until 5 years ago, which did incentivise. Actually, ironically, while we were in the EU, we had these kind of rules, which meant that particular areas were favoured. And regional policy has just been completely dismantled over these years. So you can be much bolder in that regard and actually say, we don't want as many quangos, we don't want as many reviews and consultations. We want a strong government, a strong state, which is actually steering the economy in a particular direction, not necessarily a bigger one. And we also, let's be honest about it, we don't want as much money to be spent on the benefits system, because actually what we want is better transport, better infrastructure, those kind of industrial socialism things that we've seen Labour governments of the past do. That's what I want to see, not more into day-to-day spending to prop up this failing neoliberal orthodoxy.
Let's give this a name. It's essentially Blue Labour, is what you're advocating. You talked there about the welfare stuff. Arguably, the turning point of the Starmer government was when your colleagues effectively blocked not even a cut in welfare, but a $5 billion uptick in welfare. That was a sort of emblematic moment that showed that Downing Street wasn't really in charge of things. It feels like the left, the soft left, have the sort of votes in your party at the moment. How big is Blue Labour? How much clout have you got? And how do you win that argument on welfare? Because as you say, I've spoken to people in Downing Street in the Treasury who say, this is the Labour Party. It's not the sitting around doing nothing party. But that feels like what number 10 and number 11 felt like they had to embrace at the time of the last budget, if anything, just to keep your colleagues quiet. So can you win this argument? How big are you?
Yeah, so I think...
Show us your muscles, Jonathan.
Yeah, so in terms of people who would say, yes, I would associate myself with Blue Labour within the parliamentary party right now, a couple of dozen.
Yep.
But I think there are a huge number who represent constituencies like mine, again, those areas north of England, Midlands, all over the country in many cases, who would say, yes, I understand exactly what they are saying there. I think on that specific piece of legislation, there's a lot of different things going on there in the sense that the backbenchers didn't feel like they had really had any input into this.
Yep.
The specific proposal was more of a cut rather than a reform. It was basically the Treasury going
It was sold as the Treasury saying, well, let's save some money. It wasn't sold as these people are on the scrap heap and there's a moral duty to get them into the workplace, which an argument you could have made.
Exactly. And there are so many instances during this government where actually you could make an argument for some of the things we've done and not got into the issues we've had. So the winter fuel allowance, for instance, there was an argument to be made there, whatever you think about it.
Yep.
But what was said was, well, we've got to do it. We haven't got a choice. There wasn't actually a moral argument made there about, well, what about the younger generation? There's a lot of talk about the student loans now, the fact that they can't afford a house and so forth. And if you're going to spend precious state resources, where do you want it to be? So I think there will be more welfare reforms, I think. There has to be.
Because Number 10 have basically said that's off the agenda. The Times splashed on this last week. It feels like that's not a fight they want to have right now.
Well,
but most people I speak to say, how do you save any money in this country? You've got a lot of people inactive who don't need to be. And it's not just about saving money. It's about making those people, give them some dignity, but also make them economic players in the economy. If they're working, they've got more money to spend, and that's good for the general well-being of the country and the government as well.
I'm glad you used the word dignity, because that's what people who believe in the Blue Labour position talk about all the time, is we want work to be meaningful and dignified. And, we can have a big debate about the extent to which work has actually become less meaningful, more sending of emails. I don't know whether I'm allowed to say...
I don't think anybody's sending emails now, are they? See how long they survive.
But you know what I mean? Am I allowed to say bullshit jobs on your podcast?
Of course you are,
we actually want people to be in work because it's one of the things that makes life worth living.
Yep.
And the idea that so many young people are out of work, that is the tragedy of all of this, is that actually we're not talking about people who've necessarily, fallen out of work mid-career. In many cases, we're talking about people who have never worked, and actually we want to give people that opportunity. Creating good jobs, having as I said earlier, a strong state which is going about saying, okay, in this area we're going to focus on this particular kind of industry because we need it in this country, we think it's worthwhile. Whereas at the moment we still have this kind of economic system where we're kind of going abroad and begging, foreign companies or foreign countries to invest in our country, not really kind of shaping it as we want. And don't get me wrong, this is a difficult correction to make, right? But we need to do it.
Yeah, we've got a cover story this week on, the sort of looming AI revolution that's coming. And there's obviously a big issue around a lot of white-collar jobs potentially being lost there. People like Maurice Glassman, your kind of spirit animal, I guess, as Blue Labour would say, the jobs that will be secure in the future are the blue-collar jobs, the plumbers and the electricians and all that kind of thing, and that we should give, dignity and respect back to those people. The flip side of all this is we're not going to have this revolution unless we've got enough energy, and you've got Ed Miliband sitting in the cabinet basically saying, no, we can't do that because I've got my net zero targets. Where's Blue Labour coming from on the sort of energy debate and net zero? Is that something that ought to be a shibboleth that is stuck to come what may, or ought there to be more sort of compromise in terms of, economic and technical future for the country?
Pragmatic. We have to be pragmatic. And I think particularly with this moment in geopolitics, which I referenced earlier, we have to be realistic about the fact that we can't rely on imports from abroad, particularly from some of the sources where these resources are available. So we have to be very, very hard-headed, and I think we probably do need to kind of level with the public and say, look, the UK is 1% of global emissions. We're not going to kind of stop climate change on our own. We're very much of the view that we should take measures to try and decarbonise our economy, absolutely, where we can. But at the same time, let's be realistic about the fact that there will have to be mitigation as well. Because look at the US, the current administration are not really that interested in climate change. Look at China, not that interested in climate change. Russia, not that interested in climate change. So we have to be realistic while doing our best to decarbonise our economy as we go. So, I think there'll be more to come on that later in this Parliament.
In one of your governments, I'm not sure Mr. Miliband would be still in place. But,
well, let's see. Let's see.
when you rule the world.
Well, I think the government's doing good stuff on nuclear, for instance. That's something that people who, traditionally as part of the Green lobby were not that accepting of. But actually, it's a great, reliable, low-carbon energy source. So we should absolutely be running towards that. So I'm glad to see that. What we need, though, is the bloated state to actually not get in the way of building those nuclear power plants, because the problem with building infrastructure in this country is not actually building the things, it's getting them through the planning process.
Yeah. You talked about wokery earlier. One of the things that baffles me about this government is, in opposition, you're having a huge, great fight about the trans issue. Keir Starmer was put under huge pressure because of his reluctance to say, what a woman was for a long time. He kind of gradually eased his way into what I suspect you and I might regard as a more sensible position. But the Supreme Court have ruled on this now and said women must have their defined spaces. You shouldn't be putting trans women in jails and all that sort of stuff. And yet the government hasn't issued the advice on it yet. And the Education Secretary, who's got it sat on her desk, seems reluctant to do so. What on earth is going on? This seemed like an obvious ladder to climb down and say to the rest of the party, well, we understand that you care about this and we don't want to be unkind to people who are affected by these issues, but the public is not where you are, and really this is how we get off this particular high horse.
Exactly. And actually the Supreme Court did the Labour Party, I think, a massive favour in saying this very clearly. So it's really disappointing that we are coming up for a year now and we have not made it clear that we expect this to be put into practice with this guidance. It didn't make new law, it just clarified the law, and we need to go ahead with it. The Prime Minister has said that everything should flow from that. What I would say is, well, okay, let's show it, and actually let's put this issue to one side so we can actually focus on the things that we do want to be focused on. But unfortunately, it seems like we're still some way off that.
Has your group tried to speak to Bridget Phillipson about this?
I haven't personally, but I know other MPs who have. I'm part of a separate to Blue Labour, part of a group of MPs who have what might be called gender critical views. So very much of the belief that, biological sex really matters. People are free to live as they want to live, but accepting the fact that men can't become women and women can't become men.
Which would be a basic ruling in your average pub, frankly, anywhere up and down the land.
Yeah, and this is what's so frustrating about it. I go out to speak to my constituents on the doorstep, and I think I agree with them and they agree with me on a lot of the things that I would say on all sorts of issues in terms of the economy. But we are hamstrung by the fact that people, regularly during the general election say, oh, your leader doesn't know what a woman is, and I have to say, well, I do, It's embarrassing. And as you say, I think we're really quite a tolerant country, probably the most tolerant country in the world in terms of how people want to live their lives. I'm not, telling people to live a certain way. I'm just saying men shouldn't be in the women's changing rooms. Is that so controversial?
Yeah, I mean, I was very struck by a focus group I sat in. One of the respondents was a chap who ran a pub and drove a cab. He was pure Nigel Farage kind of catnip, this guy. And he said, I don't care who goes to whichever loos in my pub, but if you start putting natal men in women's sports races, or you start putting them in women's jails, that's where I draw the line. And all the polling suggests that the British public, as you say, does not care about, how people live their lives, but they just care when it affects other people. And that seems to be escaping the Secretary of State for Education and quite a number of your colleagues.
Yeah, and I don't know the extent to which it is pressure from other backbench colleagues which is causing that delay. I really do not know, because I don't think it's as complicated as being made out. And it would be helpful if we could put this to bed.
Time for the Prime Minister to overrule the Secretary of State for Education.
I know he's got a lot on, so perhaps that's why he hasn't intervened in this one. But if he would, that would be helpful.
The other issue that is highly contentious in the party is obviously migration. You've got Shabana Mahmood in the Home Office doing fairly radical stuff that probably goes a lot further even than the Tory government would have done 10 years ago. I mean, the polling's interesting. It says that 7 out of 10 of your voters support that, and even pushing 60% of Lib Dem voters and half of Green voters support it as well. But there's a queasiness about it, isn't there? And there seems, despite the Prime Minister kind of saying he's going to deal with this and smash the gangs. The gangs are still going strong, and we're in a lull period at the moment. But you can imagine, if things go badly in May for the Prime Minister, and then the boats start coming again. What on earth's going on? How do you deal with it, and how does Blue Labour sort of? What are you trying to persuade them to do, essentially?
Well, I'm really impressed with the way that Shabana has started in her role as Home Secretary. Obviously, she only came into the role in September. She set about those reforms, and we are seeing big reductions in legal migration. After the so-called Boris wave, I wrote an article for this publication talking about net zero migration, which people would have thought was quite unlikely, and actually it looks like we're heading that way during this Parliament. So there's something positive.
I think you got there before Nigel Farage did. Robert Jenrick was saying it, but even Farage was slower than
I don't
than
follow his utterances that closely, but that's helpful to know. I was making the left-wing economic case for low controlled migration,
which is what. Just give our viewers a bit of. What is the moral objection to it?
Well, if you think
there's nothing to do with race, presumably, and all of that. It's to do with services and cohesion.
Yeah, well, yes,
which the Prime Minister's been telling us about today.
Yeah, exactly. But if you think about it at this level, you talk about the fact that we have lots of migrants who are doing a low-waged, critical work. And a lot of people who would describe themselves as on the left or progressive or whatever would say, oh, but what about all these people? What would we do without them? You take a step back, what they're really saying there is we need to take the workforce of developing countries to come and do the cheap, dirty work that they perceive British people as not wanting to do. What is ethical about that? What is socialist about that? The idea that actually we need to have a free market so that people can suppress wages in that way, both in the private and the public sector, by the way, is from a socialist perspective, is wrong. So it's not about saying we don't want migration. It's about saying that for the last quarter of a century, the British public have been telling politicians we want lower migration. And one of the reasons why the Conservatives are in such a mess is they basically stuck two fingers up to their voter coalition after 2019, and we had net migration of nearly 1 million in 1 year. So, this is just about having it low and controlled. But you talk about the boats, that is obviously the totemic thing, and it is not unreasonable for members of the public to think the government should control who comes into the country. That really is not unreasonable at all. And I think we can get ourselves tied up in knots because we start from the position of saying, well, there are these legal barriers, etc. What I appreciate about the way that Shabana is going about things is she's saying, I'm starting from the position of we are going to stop this, and then I will go about getting rid of the barriers which are in my way on dealing with that. So you're right, absolutely crucial summer coming because the issue always goes away to some extent during the winter because of the weather, fewer boat arrivals. But really, if we don't sort this out, we are in very, very big trouble. And actually, politics in general, again, it's that ability for the state to actually enact the democratic will. And clearly, people who are on the left, people who would vote for, as you mentioned, parties which are described as progressive or whatever you want to call it, they also, they don't think the boats situation is acceptable either. So
it's a sort of running saw about the failure of government, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's partly about, how can I not get a GP appointment because there's too many people locally and not enough services? But it's even for people who've never seen a migrant, you look at it and you think, how can the government not deal with it? So
the situation that we've inherited from the Conservatives, and is still too much the case, is that if you get on a boat and arrive in Britain, there's a pretty good chance that you won't leave.
Yeah.
That has to be completely flipped on its head. And we need a much, much stronger deterrent, which means that if you do that, then it's very unlikely that you will be able to stay in Britain.
Yeah.
That means having a stronger deterrent. So I'm giving the Home Secretary time because, as I say, she's only been in post for a matter of months. But I like the mindset that she's going into it with. She's putting a lot of pressure on herself by saying, I will do whatever it takes to secure our borders. I like that. I think, yeah, absolutely. Let's see it.
I mean, she's also talked about possibly, leaving the European Convention on Human Rights in parts of the way it pertains to asylum, right? Not abandoning it altogether, as the Tories and Reform have said, but it feels very unlikely that this Prime Minister and this Attorney General, who are, kind of helped create the whole human rights industry in this country, are going to go along with that. Do you think that might ultimately be necessary to do that?
Well, there is work going on to agree with other European countries that we're going to take a more restrictive view of those particular articles, and I would agree with that work. I'm looking forward to seeing what comes of it. What I would say is that is actually as much about removals when people have already got here.
Yep.
Now, as I say, I'm talking about a deterrent, which means that basically people stop coming over because it's not as appealing. So it is relevant, but for me, how do we have that deterrent which says it's very unlikely you're going to be able to stay here? That's what I'd be looking for to really shift the dial on this. We've got the French deal, of course, as well. But, a good few months in now, it doesn't seem to be getting fantastic results. Again, giving the Home Secretary time. But, we need to be thinking more radical.
People have come than have gone back as a result of it.
Yeah, and we're talking about 3-figure numbers here. Yeah. So I think we need to think very radically.
To shift the dial, you need tens of thousands, essentially, really.
Yeah. And I think if we had a deterrent which said you will never be able to stay on the UK mainland if you arrive here on a boat, then I think we'd see a big reduction in the boats very, very quickly.
And that means foreign deals, processing offshore and all that sort of thing.
Well, I think the problem is that you then get back into the territory of the legal obstacles getting in the way. So I would say, we've got lots of UK territory. Is there somewhere that we could have as the reception centre for people who arrive in a boat, which is, perfectly acceptable accommodation, but is not living in communities in the UK because they are, supposed to be refugees after all. So that's the kind of thing I'd be looking at.
How bad are the May elections going to be for Labour, do you think?
They're going to be bad. But I think it's important that to what I was saying before, we don't misinterpret what is being said. I still think there is a route to the Labour Party winning the next general election. I think there's a huge number of people in the country who don't want Nigel Farage to be the Prime Minister. Of course, there will be people who don't like Labour as well. But I think, if you look at the fact that we're at an unpopular ebb and still Keir Starmer is favoured by more people to be the Prime Minister in some polls than Nigel Farage, shows you that our principal opponents are not that strong. We're in a lucky situation. The Conservatives are licking their wounds. No one's really listening to what they're saying. They've obviously got lots of defections going, demoralising them to Reform. And Reform are riding this wave of resentment on immigration. So if we can actually tackle that, then it's hard to know what Reform will tackle, tack to in terms of their message. So I think there's reason for optimism in the longer term in this Parliament, but I think we'll get a good battering in the locals, unfortunately.
And if Keir Starmer phoned you on the 8th of May and said, Jonathan, things are sticky. I know they're bad. Some people want me out. I'd like you to support me. What's the one thing I need to do to turn this around? What would you tell him?
I suppose there's a mindset thing and then there's an issue thing. So I think in terms of an issue, in terms of actually tackling something which people have been asking for so long to be sorted, is the boats issue.
Yep.
Make that a key focus, because then we don't have to fight the next election on immigration, because we've got the legal migration down. If we stop the boats, we can talk about other things. You
make it like a COVID crusade, essentially, something that's public and part of your narrative.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but I think we all know that if this was stopped, then everyone in the country would know about it. You talk about cut through.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing would cut through like that. But in terms of an overall mindset thing, it is about being bolder and more radical, because we've had too many reviews, too many consultations. The people elect the government to run the country, and they might not like some of the decisions that you make, but actually we need a clearer direction of travel. And a good example of this, where I feel like we've kind of let ourselves get behind, is on the social media stuff. Social media for under 16s, very popular policy to ban it for under 16s, basically free.
Yeah.
And you can announce it straight away. and we've knocked it out for a review again. Now, I know there needs to be policy work done, but let's just say we're doing it and we're going to make it work.
I don't know how many reviews there are, but they're into the hundreds now. And with that, I know people were warning them months in advance. There's going to be an amendment to the bill. They're going to be forced to think about this. And again, it just seemed that everything was very flat-footed. Even an easy win, an open goal that was sort of not seized on there. Are you generally optimistic, though, or is this a pretty difficult time to be a Labour MP?
It is a difficult time to be a Labour MP. There's no doubt about that. It's been a tough start. But you know what you're signing up for. And I think we all knew that the country was in a bit of a state and this was going to be very, very difficult. And we'd obviously gone into the election with quite a limited set of commitments. So there were going to be hard choices that need to be made. But as I said, in terms of the next general election, I still think there is a way through for Labour to win it, and politics is so volatile that who knows what could happen.
Jonathan, thanks very much for your time, and thank you very much to all of you for watching.